Hey there. I'm going to spend some time covering two sections of your textbook today. The first one is the section on society in Nigeria, and the second one is the current issues text about Boko Haram. And we'll do those in that order. I have told you by this point, probably an unsettling number of times, that the number one issue you need to think about in Nigerian politics for this class is social cleavages. And the major ones are ethnicity, religion, and geography overlaid on top of each other. So let's start with ethnicity. As I think I've said before, Nigeria is extremely diverse. There's only over 250 different ethnic groups in the country. The three biggest are, number one, the Hausa and Fulani. These groups are often treated jointly for purposes of sort of analyzing demography and social cleavages because of their kind of intertwined history in pre-colonial Nigeria. They account for something like 29% of the population. They're concentrated in the north of the country. Second biggest ethnic group is called the Yoruba. They are about 21% of the population, concentrated in the southwest of the country. And then the third largest group is the Igbo. The G is silent. Important that you remember that. They constitute about 18% of the population, and most of them live in the east or the southeast of the country. But of course, there are many, many other ethnic groups as well, and it's worth remembering that the Niger Delta in the south is a region of particular ethnic diversity. The reason that this presents a particular political difficulty in terms of holding the country together and maintaining a clear sense of national identity is that Nigeria is a colonial invention. There is no political entity pre-intervention of the British with the same borders. And so it's really, really, on an historical level, kind of difficult to weave these many different groups with separate histories and separate traditions together into a single sort of Nigerian entity. Why does ethnicity matter politically? A couple of reasons. Number one, there is, some fairly common ethnic violence in Nigeria. Some of this also overlaps with economic and religious differences or conflicts over resources, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later in this lecture. But there is some amount of ethnic violence and ethnic conflict around the country, often in the run-up to and in the immediate aftermath of elections. Related to that, or perhaps probably causally related to that, many politicians at various levels of Nigerian politics attempt to exploit ethnic rivalries. They attempt to gin up votes by going around saying that people who are not of our ethnic group are going to take away our stuff, and the only way that you can keep your stuff for our ethnic group is to vote for me, a member of our ethnic group. And so you'll see the exploitation of those rivalries by politicians, cynically attempting to gin up votes, even without such a disastrous way of resorting to just really despicable political tactics. You'll also see politicians using these often ethnically defined patronage networks to try and build loyalty for themselves and ensure that they're going to be able to stay in power. Finally, on the regime level, if you think back to the way Nigeria's constitution is structured, just a reminder that there are a variety of ways that the country's formal laws and informal norms try to require that parties be cross-ethnic, cross-religious, cross-national. And a lot of what I say about attempts to make sure that parties are cross-ethnic also will function as attempts to making sure that they have support across multiple religious groups and in multiple regions, because these social cleavages in Nigeria tend to reinforce each other. So, for instance, there's the distribution requirement in presidential elections, where in order to become president, you have to have some solid base of support in most of the country. There's the federal character principle, which requires that members, citizens of each Nigerian state be represented in the cabinet and in the civil service. And then, of course, there's the norm of zoning instituted by the PDP and now apparently also practiced by the APC, where candidates nominated for president alternate between Northerners and Southerners. Number two, and again, often overlapping with ethnicity, is religion. Roughly speaking, and you should put an asterisk on these data because it's just difficult in almost every context to collect really good data about religious identity at a population level. Roughly 50% of Nigerians are Muslim, and Muslims tend to be concentrated in northern Nigeria. About 40% are Christian, and about 10% practice some variety of indigenous or animist beliefs. Those last two groups are also concentrated in southern Nigeria. And it's just worth noting that if you look at figures for religion in Nigeria, these are the ones that the textbook gives you. But you're going to find a variety of different figures. For one thing, Nigeria's last census, I think, was in 2006, and I don't believe that it collects data on religious identification at all. For another, there's often a lot of overlap between categories, right? In particular, it's quite possible to go to a Christian church and also to hold and practice some other indigenous or animist or traditional religious beliefs, and the same thing for being Muslim. So religious identity is squishy, and don't take these data super seriously. The important point is there's a fairly even division between the two major world religions that are represented in great numbers in Nigeria, those being Islam and Christianity. So there's cleavages between those religions, right? The difference between Muslim and Christian is significant, but it's also worth noting that there are cleavages within these religions. There is immense diversity of religious practice among Muslim Nigerians and among Christian Nigerians. In Islam, the longer term tradition, the older tradition in Nigerian Islam, is a variety known as Sufism, which tends to be which is a more mystical or spiritual approach to Islam. It tends to go better with syncretic practices that are drawn from other traditional cultures. Whereas on the other hand, especially since independence, there's been a growing presence of a different approach to Islam called Salafism, which was introduced by Saudi missionaries starting around the 1960s, and insists on a much more literal and kind of puritanical interpretation of the Quran. It's much more close to fundamentalism. Within Christianity, the legacy of British colonialism, of course, established a major presence for the Anglican Church, the Church of England, within Nigeria. And there's also a significant older Catholic presence as well, thanks to missionary activity. But in more recent years, the Pentecostal Church and other charismatic and evangelical Christian traditions have been making a lot of gains in terms of winning converts in Nigeria. And so now it's actually pretty common to see even Anglican, these kind of what used to be stodgy old Anglican churches in Nigeria, adopting some of those more charismatic elements of Christian worship. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying that there is a significant degree of difference within religious traditions as well as between these religious traditions. For the purposes of politics, why do we care? Number one, as is the case with ethnicity, there are also some attempts in the structure of Nigeria's regime to accommodate religious difference among the populations. And the one of these that's really unique to religion that I haven't already mentioned today is that the law allowing for traditional subsidiary courts to be created at the state level has been used by 12 northern states since the start of the Fourth Republic to create Sharia courts. Those are courts that use Islamic law to decide a variety of disputes. There are some religious differences in sort of political ideology and political behavior between Muslims and Christians in Nigeria writ large, bearing in mind that there's also plenty of between religion differences. I'll throw a link to the source that I'm citing, which is some polling data from the Gallup organization, into the description for this video. But a couple of examples are, for instance, that in 2019, Muslims had a much higher approval rating for Muhammadu Buhari's government than did Christians. Muslims also expressed much higher trust for the military. And it's worth remembering, by the way, that during and immediately after the colonial period, the military tends to be one of the best routes to upward social mobility for Muslim northerners because most of them come from a region that is less economically developed and offers fewer other opportunities for advancement. One last thing is that there are, as is the case with ethnicity, there's a number of violent conflicts in Nigeria between individuals that have religious dimensions. Put aside for the moment the terrorist group Boko Haram, which I'll talk about in the last section of this lecture, but even on the level of individual conflicts or conflicts between sort of private citizens not acting as part of an organized group, sometimes a conflict over, say, land, say if a herder wants land to graze their animals that a farmer would rather have to plant their crops. Conflicts over that land might also invoke the religious and the ethnic differences between those two people or those two households. It's often an oversimplification in Nigeria, as in many other parts of the world, to say that violence is strictly religious or sectarian. There's often also ethnic and or socioeconomic reasons why people come into conflict with each other. Nonetheless, there are sometimes violent conflicts between Muslims and Christians in Nigeria, and that adds to this kind of atmosphere of tension that is really important for the country's political institutions to try and deal with. Source of cleavage number 3, and again overlapping with these other two, is geography. And here we also want to start thinking about economic development levels. So just a reminder that regional cleavages and ethnic cleavages and religious cleavages all overlap with or reinforce each other. So if you are in the north, you are likely, the population is likely to be dominated by Muslims who are of the House of Fulani ethnic group, for instance. In particular, in addition to the religious and ethnic differences that I've now mentioned ad nauseum, there are some significant disparities between the north and the south of Nigeria in, number one, economic development. So this map shows you, I think these data are from 2019, differences in average annual income per person in Nigeria's states. That dark blotch in the middle with a really high average annual income per person is Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. But with that exception, you can note that in general, the north of Nigeria is an awful lot poorer than the south. Number two, access to education is much better in the South, much more widespread in the South, especially for girls. The gender disparity is even greater for girls between North and South than it is for students overall. And so you tend to see lower rates of educational attainment in the North and also lower rates of literacy for adults in the North. And again, those disparities are especially severe when you're looking at girls and women. Finally, number three, northern Nigeria tends to experience more violence. This map is on a really weird scale, and I encourage you to take a look at the link so that you can, look at the data source and get a slightly more nuanced version of this. It's kind of weird that the deaths per state scale ranges from 4 to 9,154, but we'll talk about why you have such high levels of violence, specifically in Borno State, in just a moment. One last thing to note, it's an important fact to remember, and I'm just going to throw it in here because it kind of fits, is that one accommodation for these religious differences was a specific decision taken under military rule to relocate the capital. The British colonial capital was in Lagos, all the way in the southwest. You can see this kind of narrow province, or I guess a short, wide province, right on the Atlantic coast. That's Lagos, that's the old capital. But in 1991, the government moves that capital to a purpose-built capital called Abuja, smack in the middle of the country, in an attempt to try and make it seem as if the benefits of having the government located near you will accrue evenly to Northerners and Southerners. Okay, number four, and if you are following along in your textbook, I am moving from society to the current issues section. One development that's important in its own right, and that also shows us a lot about the effects of these various social cleavages in Nigeria, is the emergence of a terrorist group called Boko Haram. Boko Haram roughly translates to Western education is forbidden, sounds a lot better in Hausa than it does in English. And this is a radical Islamist group that is based in Borno State, all the way in the northeast of Nigeria. Originally, this group's founded in 2002 as kind of a peaceful splinter sect with significant religious differences from traditional Nigerian Islam. But in 2009, the Nigerian military captures and executes Muhammad Yusuf, who's the leader of Boko Haram. He's replaced by a guy named Abubakar Shekau, who has a considerably more radical ideology. And at this point, Boko Haram makes a definitive turn towards violence. Boko Haram has launched significant attacks on a number of military and police targets, but also on a number of civilian targets, including both Christian and Muslim religious institutions and places of worship. Most notably, if you've heard of Boko Haram, one of the reasons why was likely that in 2014, the group kidnapped 276 female students in the town of Chibok in Borno State and held them hostage. In fact, about 100 of those girls remain missing as of this recording in the summer of 2021. Overall, the Boko Haram insurgency and separatist movement has led to some really serious violence. There's more than an estimated 20,000 casualties related to Boko Haram since 2009. And again, as you saw in the previous slide, most of those are concentrated in northern Nigeria. That said, it's really important to note that the state response has also caused a huge number of problems for civilians in northern Nigeria. So various Nigerian governments have sent in police and military forces to attempt to track down Boko Haram and to try and counter their presence in northern Nigeria. But about half of those 20,000 casualties have come at the hands of military and police rather than at the hands of terrorists. And so it's worth noting that the state response has just raised serious concerns about human rights, about the rule of law, about abuse, about illegal detention, about extrajudicial executions, and so on and so forth. We'll say a lot more about this in class, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but it is worth thinking before I see you next about the ways in which the Boko Haram group reflects a bunch of those different social cleavages, and also might present opportunities for the Nigerian state to either improve or lose some degree of sovereignty and stability. I'll leave it there. Thank you.